Happy Friday, everyone. We're really excited to have you join us today. Welcome to this week's Collate 30 on 30. And in today's session, you'll be hearing directly from Joe, our solutions engineer at Collate, who's going to walk us through a live session on data governance. And we've got a packed agenda, so let me hand it over to Joe to kick things off.
Perfect. This is episode number 5. We've covered things from Collate 101 to our really impactful MCP server. We've also talked about data quality, getting things done with automations, and today we'll be having a session on governance and how Collate can really fill the gap there. So really thinking about governance, we're going to really think about a couple of elements and angles today, not just how you can do governance within your organization, but how we can make governance not be a blocker. So I'll be showing off different things like our classifications, our domains, our lineage is a powerful one, as well as things like automations, reverse metadata, and AI to really help speed these things along. So right now I'm in my Collate instance. This is our new 1.9.1 layout. So you will see that the homepage has a little bit more pop, a little bit more flair. I'm a data consumer right now. That's the hat I'm wearing. So it looks like I'm wearing the wrong hat, but we're able to see data assets and assets for you. Let me put my data governance lens on. So now I am a data governance analyst, just changing the persona. Notice now I'm calling out PII elements. I have some KPIs for total data assets or descriptions or owners. I'm seeing my domains and activity feeds, really allowing a data governance analyst to see what they need immediately upon logging in. Change the color just to help me keep track of things, but already thinking of governance not just as a function that a consumer or end user should be doing, but really this own role, this own persona, and we're going to be thinking about how that persona can interact with the platform and see what's out there. One nice thing is I do have this PII element. So what this is a curated widget just for me. If I click on this view more option, I'm going to go to my search results and it's already going to have that saved search for me of PII sensitive. So I can start reviewing, start seeing what's out there and being able to understand what is PII, what is not. PII is the low-hanging fruit when it comes to governance and something a lot of organizations can get behind because we all have customers, meaning we all have customer data. So really being able to understand that and treat that data as necessary and as needed. So again, that save search, that custom persona just allows me to get into my governance lens a little bit quicker. I've also changed my navigation to be more governance focused. I have my classifications, I have my domains, I have my workflows and automations, all topics that we'll talk through in just a moment here. So I know this customer table is PII. I'm going to click into it and I can start seeing some different elements. I see that, yep, this is PII sensitive. So I'm able to capture that element. I can see that I have lineage tags and other elements. Now, the important thing that I like to call out here is, so what, Joe? This is PII sensitive. What does that mean? We have about 50 or 60 people on this call right now. And if I were to ask each and every one of you, what is PII? I would get 50 to 60 different answers and questions and things like that. So we don't want to just call something sensitive because that doesn't allow us to get the full context. More importantly, if I were to ask the same 50 or 60 people on this call, I would get 50 or 60 different answers on how we should treat PII data. Luckily, within Collate, all it takes is a quick little hover over where I can actually see what PII sensitive is, or I can click into this and see, okay, PII, direct identifiers, indirect identifiers, sensitivity categories. I can also see handling information like collection, usage, storage, rights, and reporting. So already solving part of the problem. The problem isn't just identifying PII, but it's also allowing users to know what classifies as PII, and more importantly, how should it be handled? How should it be stored? How should it be reported on? What does the oversight process look like? So really giving us a good understanding of what that looks like. And again, I can just click into assets here and see everything that meets that PII sensitivity. Now, PII, like I mentioned, is the low-hanging fruit when it comes to classifications from a governance lens. What we also can do within Collate is create different types of classifications. So it's not just a tag, a label, a sticker, but it's really a grouping of these related elements. If I go into my PII, I can actually see sensitivity, non-sensitive, none. I can go into elements like my tiering, or I can go into things like GDPR, or my certification and other elements like that to really build this. I've seen other companies treat classifications as just, hey, let's just put a sticker on it with no organization, no structure, and no governance. We're trying to solve that problem. So we're really able to do that with these PII tags and other tags that you might be interested in creating. These can have their own icon, these can have their own colors, they can belong to domains or specific owners, because what governance is all about is really creating that structure to use data in an efficient and responsible manner. So thinking about those hallmarks, not just as we apply it, but as we think about the approach to applying things. The other thing I want to think about when it comes to governance is not just putting a little sticky note on something, but I also want to think about the different domains that might be out there. So we might handle data within the customer domain different than data that we would handle in the product domain. So it's really important that we have this context. And with Collate, you're able to create these domains, you're able to create subdomains and add different things like data products within these, or see what assets belong to these elements. So I can go into data products. I'm going to click into this customer 360 and I can see what it is. And I can then go back to my customer table asset here. So full circle, we went from the customer table to the tag to the domain back to this customer table. Also really thinking about how easy it is to navigate from one area to another. Now, we've talked about tags, we've talked about domains. Some other elements of governance that is incredibly important is the concept of owners, tiers, and certification. So I need to make sure who is responsible for this table. Well, it's Joe Perez, of course. I need to understand the impact and severity of this table. So it's a tier 2 table. And is it in our bronze layer? Is it in our gold layer? Is it in our silver layer? Understanding that context. So we really want to make sure data management is done effectively and appropriately, and that data is handled in the best way possible. The next element I'm going to call out that deviates ever so slightly from the tagging and domains element is our new element on contracts. If you were on our open metadata meetup on Wednesday, there's a recording if you weren't on YouTube, really goes into contracts. But really what I want to call out here is how we can use data contracts from a governance lens. So what I'm seeing here is details of this contract. I'm seeing the schema, but I'm also seeing some semantic elements as well. I can see the status as well as any quality check. So I can actually look at the YAML for this. I can see who the owner is, and I could also edit these things. So maybe I wanted to change the semantics. So here I have that owner is customer team, data product is 360, and the tier is tier 1. So really thinking about the semantics of this table, what requirements are there, again, tying back to not just throwing labels on things, but actually enforcing this, I can see the semantic test failed because the tier isn't 1, it's tier 2, although the other checks pass. So again, being able to enforce that governance is an incredibly useful process, and that's where these contracts can come in. It's not enough to just have a label on something. I want to make sure that it's passing, it's being validated, and of course, I can click on this contracts failed to see what are the issues. So everything about this table can be right from a scheme or quality standpoint, but from a semantics, governance checks-esque element, we could actually enforce that. Now, I know some things just focus on a YAML file, incredibly technical in many ways. We want to go past that a little bit and really surface the respected error information, and then think about some of that enforcement and notification of when these things fall out of sync. So just throwing those different things out there on that. The next area I want to cover is how do we get these tags here in the first place? Well, there's a couple ways you can do that. I can manually edit these tags using my little icon option. Um, Obviously not that scalable. So what we can also do is we can also generate via AI different types of tags. So here I had 1,300 tags generated via Collate AI. So what we're able to do is look at something like a social security number, 3 digits dash 2 digits dash 4 digits. That looks like a social security number. It has the column ID. We're able to parse that information, look at the format of the data, and then automatically suggest that maybe this should be treated as PII. So again, if we look at how many total, it's about 1,350. How many of that was done by AI? 99%. So if I were to cover this whole database by hand, it would take forever to get those 1,000 manually. AI gives us a huge time saver, a huge boost in productivity when it comes to some of those elements like tags and like tiers to really get that comprehensive coverage. And of course, I can actually track these things because what are we without insights? All that work that we've done is for nothing. We can actually track that in the last 6 days. Our PII coverage has stayed flat, but we have about 45% of that coverage. We can see things like description, owners, and healthy assets as well. So really allowing us to get that insight that's ever so valuable. AI is just one way. I'm a pro believer in AI. I think it is the future, and we're spending a lot of time. But sometimes it's nice to do things the old fashioned way. And what I mean by the old fashioned way is your business has requirements, your business has rules. We don't think AI is smarter than those rules. So we want to give you a way to create those rules. And I have this PII tag right here. I'm just going to walk through what it's doing. It's looking at my table assets. It's looking at for columns that contain email, 4,000 of those assets. So again, just think about how long it would take you to manually do that. And then I want to add the tag sensitive to all of them. So anything with an email, mark it as sensitive. Now you can do things like first underscore name, first name. It doesn't have to be a contain. There's a lot of flexibility when it comes to, creating these rules. So I can, use a regex expression or, oops, I can use a regex expression or a set. I can also not only apply tags, but add additional actions. One of my favorite actions is this lineage propagation. And what this will do is take a tag that is upstream and then push it downstream. And I'll show an example of that in just a few moments here. But again, different ways to really accelerate our time to tag, to value, and to governance. We don't want governance operations to get in the way of progress. We want to make sure that we're doing these things efficiently and at scale while providing the context and the guidance on what it means for our end users. Going back to that handy dandy customer table, we now want to take a look at lineage here. So I have some nice looking lineage where I can see the staging table, the raw tables, and different elements here upstream and downstream where necessary. Again, I'm being lazy today. I'm just thinking about things as PII sensitive or not, but sky's really the limits here. Maybe I only wanted to know where PII data live. I'm a governance analyst. Remember, I have my governance hat on. Let's find out where PII lives. Let's go to the tag and let's just click sensitive. Before I click sensitive, notice I have maybe 10 or so objects here. Your lineage probably has 20, 30, 50, 100 or more. So it's really important that you're able to simplify it. I already have a pretty simple view, but let's make it even more simple. I can now see I have my staging, customer, and new view. These are all elements that contain PII data. So I'm able to actually push tags from raw customers all the way downstream where needed, and I can really start to understand different elements like that. And if I was a governance analyst and I only cared about where PII sensitive data was, I don't want to see product data, quite frankly. I don't want to see orders data. Why am I being blurred with all that other information? Well, rest assured, we can just put that sensitivity view on and really begin to understand this. I can also look at it from a column standpoint where necessary, as well as have some other filters like domain or like data product or like service to really understand this overall lens. So I was able to use automations for tagging and marking things as PSI. I was able to use automations to move things down lineage. Again, I don't want to tag something 10 times. I want to tag it at the raw layer potentially and then just push it downstream in a lot of cases. So just thinking about the utility from doing that. We also talked about how our AI can help in that governance. The other thing I want to call out here is we're just talking about Collate. Collate does offer a reverse metadata feature where we can send tags to Snowflake, we can send tags to Databricks, we can send description and owners to Redshift. And by being able to send this, Collate becomes that governance plane for not just one data source, but all of your data sources. And then you can push those things out to those different downstream sources. What that's going to really allow you to do is then create different types of policies on a row level or on a column level to really then allow for certain privileges and access controls in Snowflake. So Snowflake and Databricks both have that concept of role-based policy access-based controls that can be leveraged and defined by tags. We're able to send those tags to those systems to help control those access. One thing I also want to call out, an area that we are working on, is our security connectors. So right now we have a Ranger service that will allow you to send tags to Ranger to then apply masking and other types of policies on the data there. Because not every data source has a tag. Trino, for instance, is a virtualization system. It doesn't have that concept of tags, but we can then send the Trino tag to Ranger and then have Ranger set that masking policy or whatever is needed there. So just thinking about those other edge cases that may not fall under the run-of-the-mill Snowflake or Databricks S tagging. And then the last thing I want to close with is thinking it's not just tags, but it's also things like knowledge, governance surrounding glossaries and metrics. We really want to make sure we have good understanding and standardization across the board on how people do things. So we need to provide that context. With metrics, we're able to see the overview. Is this an average? Is this in dollars? Is this in month? What is the breakdown, the expression that people should be using? Again, it's not all privacy related. There's a whole lot more to governance, like really making sure we have that standardization, we have that governance surrounding things like knowledge articles, surrounding things like glossary terms, and surrounding things like KPIs and metrics. And then we could also make sure we're fostering trust around those things by using our workflow. So I have a glossary approval workflow here that is mapping to approval or pending or rejected X elements. I can define this workflow and its approvers. And if I just jump into my glossary here, actually, I don't have my glossary handy. Let me just go to a term. If I go to my customer success, I believe is a good one, I can see that a lot of these are approved and I can actually have an approved or reject. I think financial services, I also have a lot of these approved and I can set reviewers and other elements to make sure it goes through the proper chain of command before getting that nice little stamp of, hey, this is good to go. This should be consumed. Have a great day. So to recap some of the things that we've covered here, we've talked about how do we create that visibility around classifications, around tags. We want everyone in the organization to be on the same page. We've talked about that briefly with having custom metrics, glossary terms, having workflows and approval processes surrounding those elements for governance. We also talked about how you can get to governance quickly, automations, AI, lineage propagation, and then really understanding where your sensitive data lives. We can push out to Snowflake, but we can also look at a consumption view from a lineage-esque angle. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's session. Thank you for your time and happy Friday, everyone. TGIF.
All righty, everyone. Well, if we've no questions going once, going twice, I will go ahead. Oh, we have a couple questions coming into the chat, Joe.
Oh, wonderful. A customer asked if rules of privacy can be templated. So there's a couple ways we can think about that. So kind of these classifications can serve as that template where if I go into this sensitive here, I can have that overall guidance of what that looks like. So this can be the standard de facto way. And then I could create automations. And I think Mustafa, the automations is where the enforcement of the application of this template falls in, where these identifiers can be different elements in the automation. The column name, so if it's something's name or email address or phone number, or its IP address, or it's in a specific domain, we can then apply this tag there. So it's those two working pieces of, hey, we have this tag that defines it, and then the automation is executing and applying it that can create that policy. And then we can then send that tag to Snowflake. We can use that tag internally in Collate in our RBAC and ABAC controls to really get that enforcement and broadcasting of things. So great question there, Mustafa. Martin Soso, what do you need to enable data lineage? How does Collate know raw customer is connected to staging customer, or which tables are using a Tableau dashboard? Another great question. And just jumping back into this customer table and going into lineage, and I'm just going to pick on staging payments because it's nice and easy at the bottom when I click on this. We're looking at your SQL expressions, and we're actually able to parse those SQL expressions, so through your query logs on different systems, to be able to see how these tables are being created. In this specific case, actually, if I go down to the column level view, I can actually see that at some point ID became payment ID, and I'm actually seeing that select here. So we're able to look at those selects, parse that out, and then say ID became payment ID. So that's how we're able to do it. We have what we call a lineage agent, and that lineage agent is going to be running and parsing and completing those jobs for that Power BI or Tableau dashboard use case. Similarly, within our Tableau or Power BI agent, we have a cross-database service input where you can map your data models directly to the database service. And by looking at the naming conventions, we're able to say, okay, we know it's this other service within Collate. Let's map to those accordingly. So great question there, Martin. And then Jack had a question on, we have metadata added to the code in different layers of our stack. Can we push metadata from Collate back to the code? And how does it work with version coding? So that's actually a really great and interesting question there, Jad. We can push back to different sources. So I'm going to go to my applications and I am going to go to reverse metadata. Our reverse metadata application is actually able to push from, in this case, Redshift back from Collate Redshift back into Redshift. We can also do it with Snowflake and other things, those tags and owners, and that will then mark there. The interesting part of that question, Jad, is the code element. Collate does capture the versioning. So if I go back to that customers table and I go to versioning, I can actually see how things are being done and added, and what that looks like from a versioning standpoint. But pushing back to your code would obviously be slightly different. We do have a highly extensible API framework that we can leverage, and it may be worthwhile for us to touch on that a little bit more offline on that specific use case. So feel free to shoot me an email at joseph@getcollate.io, and we can dig into that a little bit more, because I think that's a really powerful and interesting use case that we're trying to solve. And it's these types of questions that we love getting thrown at us on these specific calls. So thanks for that, Jad, and we can touch base offline. And then Phil just came in with a question, will it be possible in a future release to create custom classifications and include them in the auto classification task? If I recall, there was a mention of built-in general classifications being available from 1.7.2. Was this Collate or the open source product? Anything that open source, open metadata can do, Collate can also perform. We do have the ability, as you know, to create those classifications. Some of these, like general, like PII, are system generated. So we're looking at these and automatically being able to apply them in that auto classifier as well as PII. We do have some stuff on the roadmap. I can't speak to it not being on the product team specifically on what release, but we are looking on how you can configure that auto classification and almost create different types of rules and standards and map them to the specific classification that you're aiming at. Again, don't know the exact version, but I know we have some of those things in mind as it comes to our roadmap. It would be kind of like an AI-powered automation is how my non-product brain processes it, but we are looking to expand in that area. So great question there, Phil. Alrighty. Well, with that, we're at the bottom of the hour. Thank you very much, Ellie. Thank you, Johnson, for helping me set this up. And thank you all for joining on your Friday morning or afternoon. Really do appreciate the engagement and the questions. And we look forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks where we have a session on APIs scheduled. So really how you can get the most out of them. Take care and see you next time.